Hey, welcome back. We're talking about off-grid rainwater catchment, filtering, and cabin plumbing. Now, when most people think about cabin plumbing, they imagine a dry cabin where it's a very manual process of bringing water in and out of the cabin, um, and there's not really any plumbing. But that's not what we're talking about. We're recreating a level of service that's as good or better as any suburban home. If you recall, our cabin has a pretty nice shower, indoor and outdoor sinks, and as you can see in front of the bears, the ground's still wet from where I just pressure washed the mini excavator. Okay, I know the way that last cub walks around the burn barrel is hilarious, so you can rewind the video a few times and watch that. But when you're done, we'll start our conversation talking about goals. Okay, so we won't spend a lot of time talking about this, but it is important as a basis for a conversation because what might be a good decision for one person might be a horrible decision for another person, all based on their goals and the use cases we'll talk about in just a second. For example, a good decision in Alaska might be a horrible decision in Arizona. Okay, so I've listed a couple of goals that are common for common reasons why people would want to do rainwater catchment and filtering. Um, Obviously, you just want to be independent from utility. Um, I think the reasons for that kind of go without saying. You might want to avoid chemicals in the water. Most municipalities add fluoride and possibly other things to the water. You never know. That's not particularly my goal, but I certainly understand it, and I'm happy not having those chemicals in the water. Um, A third one is the location. You might be in a place where there simply is no service to be had, and that in particular, um, was the driving factor for my rainwater catchment. The cabin is just a very long way from any sort of municipality, and it is on top of a mountain much higher than any of the water towers in the neighboring town. So there's really um, pumping water up here would be definitely cost prohibitive. Now, the use cases will drive us even deeper into our architectural decisions about what what our respective systems would look like. This is by no means an exhaustive list. There's lots of different things people do, but these are pretty common, right? So whole house usage is again what I'm after, as I said from the beginning, recreating the level of service of a typical suburban house, right? Um, so that's potentially a lot of work in terms of plumbing and also sizing because houses use quite a bit of water. However, not nearly as much water as irrigation um, and livestock. Livestock uses a tremendous amount of water, as anyone with cows knows already. But on the smaller side, you might just be interested in a partial backup, for emergency use. Um, recall that when Hurricane Helene hit the southern Appalachia region, a lot of people didn't just lose electricity, but they also lost their city water and their sewer. So getting water in and out of the house, became problematic for several weeks in a lot of areas. So having a partial backup is always a good thing. So we're focused on household usage here. But before we get into design, I think we need to think about sizing. And to do that, we need to look at how much water we expect to use, and then also what our rainfall looks like and compare those numbers, right? So I'm going to present some EPA data here from the US government. Um, I won't read these handful of slides to you, but the net of it is the average home in the US uses 300 gallons of water per day indoors. And it also estimates that 30% of the water used is for lawns and landscape. Now, that's not 30% of the 300 that, 300 is the 70%, right? And another 30% of the total is outdoors. So on this chart, it just sort of breaks it down and says toilets are 24%, showers are 20%, indoor faucets are 19%, leaks are 12%, and washing machines are 17%, and they've got 8% for other, right? So a little more data just for awareness. Toilets, it says old toilets use between 3 to 5 to 7 gallons per flush compared to 1.6 gallons for the current federal standard. My cabin, that's not a problem because I'm using an incinerator toilet. A lot of other cabins are using, composting or some other, off-grid type technology. So that may not apply. If you are somewhere where you're collecting, quite a lot of water, a regular toilet may be a convenience you can afford. It mentions showers here, and also clothes washers. It says average shower is 8 minutes and uses 17 gallons of water. And clothes washers, old models are roughly 40 gallons of water per load compared to 15 gallons for newer high efficiency ones. And then it sort of asks a question about why are dishwashers so efficient? Doesn't answer that, of course, which would be helpful. It just says that dishwashers really only use about 3.5 gallons per load of dishes, which is interesting to me. I thought about getting one of the smaller dishwashers because in my research, I can wash my clothes by hand using a lot less water than a washing machine. But hand washing dishes turns out to use a lot more water than dishwashers do. So, getting a small dishwasher, if you can afford the electricity, maybe a way to save some water. And the last slide of theirs I'm going to share with you, I just think is interesting information. It basically says that households only use 12% of the fresh water that we produce. In the U.S., it says 77% of our fresh water is used by thermoelectric power generation and agriculture. Now, my strong suspicion is that they're going to have to update those numbers to reflect the AI data center build-outs that are going on all over the country here. I'm going to guess that our 12% for household usage is going to drop in half, at least based on the data center usage. But that's a topic for another video. This slide also mentions leaks, which I find very interesting. It says the average U.S. household leaks 10,000 gallons of water per year. And 10% of homes have a leak that wastes 90 gallons or more per day. And it says the most common culprits here are obviously toilet flappers, dripping faucets, and leaky valves, which is kind of a no-brainer. But just interesting data. Probably not going to apply to your average cabin, but for those of you still in houses, maybe something. Now that we've got a little bit of perspective on usage, let's take a look at how much rainfall we're likely to get. In this area, in a neighboring county, I pulled the government data. This is rainfall in a month, averaged over the past 36 years in inches. So you could see how each month averaged out. And you could see that the driest month is only 2.44 inches in October, while the wettest month is 5.44 inches in July. So my cabin is 480 square feet of roof, catching the rain. And so you could see down at the very bottom, I've got some formulas for you here. 40 foot by 12 foot, 480 square feet, times 1 inch is 40 cubic feet equals 300 gallons, right? I did the conversions from inches to feet for you there. I was going to add more formulas here, but reality is these days, since you're paying so much extra on your electric bill for these AI data centers, you may as well just go to Grok or Google and say, hey, if I get 1 inch of rain on a 40 by 12 foot roof, how many gallons is that? And it'll calculate it for you, right? So if you don't want to do the math, just use AI there. But anyways, multiplying that 300 gallons by the 244 and 544, you can see 730 gallons in October is the least that I would get on average, and 1,628 gallons is the most that I would get on average. Now, keep in mind, these are averages, not guarantees. We get an El Nino year, something like that. We are currently actually in a drought in the Appalachians. It's relatively severe. We're more than 10 inches under our annual rainfall averages and have been for a couple of years. But you could see there roughly how much rain I would expect to get. And if I did take the average of those months, which is 3.5 inches, then I would get right at 1,000 gallons, 1,047 gallons per month. So you kind of think of that as the budget, although I would use the lower 730 figure. Of course, your whatever your roof is going to give you a different number. So you'll have to calculate that. But for me, somewhere between 700 and 1,000 gallons a month is pretty average. Now, based on the 300 gallon per day figure that the EPA had on the previous slides, that works out times 30 days in a month to 9,000 gallons a month. Okay. So if you wanted to meet your average household usage and collect 9,000 gallons here in Appalachia in October, you're going to need a 5,900 square foot roof. That might be an 80 by 80, or for example, 100 by 60 foot. Which I'm going to guess is not really in the cards, right? We're not really looking at that unless you've got a very large shed or metal garage or something like that. But that just I put that up there for perspective. I keep saying I'm trying to mimic or achieve the normal suburban house level of service. I am actually substantially below that. Now, for me, that's kind of working out because I'm pretty frugal about water. Again, I don't use as much as a normal house, but it works the same for me, right? In reality, I'm using less than 10% of the average household in the cabin here. Okay, now that we've got some perspective on usage and rainfall, let's get back to the interesting stuff and think about our actual build. So I'm going to use a couple pictures from early on in the build process, mostly because a lot of these components are covered up by insulation or other components right now, and they're harder to see. So sorry for the static photos, but here you can see the tank that I initially selected. This is an 1,100 gallon tank. It probably weighs a little under 200 pounds. I didn't have any problem lifting it up, moving it around by hand. However, when you start putting a little bit of water in it, it gets heavy fast, right? So at 8 and change pounds per gallon, 1,100 gallons of water is a little bit over 9,100 something pounds, which is about 4.5 tons of water. So you really need to think about what kind of foundation you're going to put under your tank. So I was initially pretty stupid and put a sand foundation under there. It was nice and flat at the beginning, but rainwater quickly eroded the sand and made little channels, and I was worried about the bottom, just eroding away. So I replaced it with a set of pavers, for 8x16 concrete pavers. You can see a few in the picture there. And that was also a really bad idea because as they started to settle, they weren't perfectly flat, right? You get like a little bit of 1/4 inch difference between the heights. And it doesn't seem like much, but I realized when you put 4.5 tons of water on that, that polymer, plastic tank bottom is not going to handle that too well. It's going to stretch and crack and develop leaks, and it'd be just a big mess. So I eventually gave in and just put a concrete pad there. And I also did that. You can see on the left there, I built a concrete battery box with concrete floor and center block sides for fire protection for my battery box. It's skinned with, plywood to make it look like the cabin, to make it match right now, but there really is concrete under there. So anyways, this is the tank and the setup that I've got. In retrospect, this is probably the biggest mistake that I've made for this cabin. Unfortunately, if I had it to do over again, I would spend the time to dig a big hole and bury a tank that was designed to be buried. And the reason for that is largely freezing in the winter, right? Having my plumbing above grade, it just freezes. It's been a horrible problem. I've tried over the years, 3 or 4 different things to solve that, which I may go through later. But none of them worked until I got the wood boiler, right? So the wood boiler is kind of like the nuclear expensive option to keep my tank from freezing and my outdoor plumbing from freezing when I should have just buried it. So in fairness, it kind of looks like dirt in the foreground there, but really it is rock on top of the mountain. And, a little bit of excavation we did with a bulldozer to make a flat spot for the cabin was very expensive in terms of replacing teeth on heavy equipment. So it still would have been worth it. But at the time we thought, hey, let's just, use an above ground tank. You can also see the, obviously the roof that I'm using to catch the rainwater and the simple gutters. They're just regular 6-inch aluminum gutters. Normally you'd use like 4. However, in this case, instead of having downspouts at every corner, I just have one downspout for the whole cabin in the back, and the gutters go all the way to the back and down. And so they kind of act like a bit of a storage. They'll fill up with water a little bit, be a little heavier than usual, because it takes a little bit of time for the water to flow through the filter that's not yet in the picture here. So that's the basics of the tank and the gutter system that I use to catch the water. Now you've kind of seen the option that I chose and my regrets about it, but there really are a lot of other options. Many videos on this topic are going to cover tanks like IBC totes. They're a very popular option. I think they're like 375 gallons. They may come in a couple different sizes and in a metal cage, which makes them easy to move around if you've got any sort of heavy equipment like a tractor with forks or something. There's larger tanks. There's smaller tanks, tanks that are intended to be buried, barrel style tanks. There's just all sorts of options out there I couldn't possibly cover in this video. And there's other options for the rainwater catchment as well. You don't have to use your roof. A lot of people will, pull water out of streams or out of a pond. What you do is going to affect, obviously the types of filtration that you're going to want to do. But there's lots of options. And speaking of filters, let's go back to the slides and talk about what we want to filter. So I'm not speaking authoritatively on this topic. I'm not an expert on filtration. I've just studied it a good bit, and I'm sharing what I know. Do your own research on this. So I've sort of categorized the contaminants here. So we have debris, which dirt, leaves, bugs, just things that we want to filter out. Then you've got a dissolved solids category. There are lots of dissolved solids which you're going to want to remove. But I mentioned there are also good minerals. So if you look on bottled water, you'll see that they've added minerals back for taste. Those are essentially dissolved solids, right? So if you do filter everything out and take the good minerals out as well, then you may not like the water taste. Personally, I do, but I guess most people don't. You've also got chemicals. These are chlorine, fluoride, etc. You've got pesticides and herbicides. You've got volatile organic compounds. You've got your nitrates and nitrites. And then you've got your PFAs. Those are your what they call forever chemicals. I put uranium on the list here just because you can have some radioactive stuff depending on where you are and what you're preparing for. I'm not filtering for uranium here or doing any sort of radioactive treatment, but some people may be a lot more concerned about that. Then you've got what I call living stuff, right? You get your bacteria and viruses, and you've also got microplastics. So we covered the list of contaminants because as we look through the list of all the different types of filters, unfortunately, we'll see that regardless of the expense, no one of these filters will remove all of the contaminants. So it's really the case that you kind of have to pick and choose depending on what contaminants are important to you. Now, each of these filters also has kind of pros and cons with it, right? So some of them require electricity. Some of them have limited lifespans and you have to replace them. Some of them are pretty basic, like filters, and you just need to kind of wash them out, reuse them. So there's some maintenance involved. They're all they all have pros and cons, right? And this is why you'll see in most more professional filtration setups, you'll see what they refer to as multi-stage filtration process, where they use one of these types of filters, followed by another type of filter, followed by a third type of filter. As your contaminated water passes through it, each one of the stages will remove some of the contaminants. Okay, this picture is from earlier in the build process when everything was nice and new and clean. It shows a leaf guard, which is a very simple physical filter that just keeps leaves and branches and stuff from going into your tank. The water flows straight down through the device, and the leaves just get pushed off to the left there. A lot of people use a device called a first flush, and the general idea for that is that when the rain starts, a lot of leaves and debris and bird poop and stuff has accumulated on your roof over some period of time, and the rain starts to wash that away. And so the idea is the first several gallons of rain off your roof are much dirtier, and you don't want them going through your filtration process. So the water naturally falls into a large tube, this first flush device, which holds some number of gallons, depending on the vendor. And as it fills up, it overflows, and the overflow goes into your tank, right? So all the rest of the rain goes in through your filters into your tank, and the first few gallons are just stored, and they eventually you open a valve and they drain out, right? So the reason I don't like that concept is I don't think anybody's really done any engineering on exactly how many gallons of dirty water you get before it starts getting clean. And I also don't like the idea of catching a bunch of water in a plastic tube during the winter, right? When it starts to freeze around here, we often get rain in the hours right before it gets super cold, and I don't want a device like that to start freezing and cracking. Your mileage may vary on that, but I'm not particularly a fan of the concept. So I'm just using a leaf guard here, and I'll show you the filter directly underneath it. So the main filter that I use before water goes into the tank is an aquarium style sock filter. They're super cheap. You can buy large packs of them. It's not complicated. They work great and last several months for me. And all I really did was use a 5-inch hole saw, stick a PVC reducer in there, and the 4-inch diameter sock filter fits perfectly. Okay, so after quite a bit of testing, I decided that filtration was actually good enough for my water, for normal sink and shower use, right? For drinking water, I use 2 more filters, right? So I use a zero water filter, which is very cheap, and you can get those, pretty much anywhere. And the zero water filter contains 5 stages in its filter. The first one is physical, a mesh filter screen, and the second one is also physical. It's a foam screen, and then it's got a activated carbon and KDF media. I'm not sure what that is, what the KDF is. It also uses the ion exchange resin, and then it finally has another mesh screen, right? So obviously they're focused on total dissolved solids, and they may or may not do a great job of the other potential contaminants. But in my area, where I'm not close to any sort of agriculture manufacturer, the air in the middle of the national forest of a mountain at this elevation is remarkably clean. I just I get clean water off the roof, I guess is what I'm trying to say. So in this picture that you see here, I've listed the EPA standard, which is less than 500 parts per million total dissolved solids. And the U.S. government considers over 1,000 to be unhealthy. Under 300 is considered excellent, and 50 to 150 parts per million is optimal for taste. And you can see written on the roof, on the lid of the filter, they want you to replace the filter when the tester reads 0.006 parts per million. I'm going to do a quick demonstration here using a total dissolved solid tester that comes with the zero water filter. So this is not exactly the lab grade precision instrument here. It really just measures the electrical current, the resistance in the liquid between these two contacts, right? So I'm going to turn it on, and for entertainment, I'm going to measure a bottle of Gatorade. I don't know if you can read that. It's kind of hard to read, but it says 598. Let me wash that off a little bit. Okay, now this is a bottle of water from this Pure Life Nestle water. And it reads 15. Hopefully you can see that. Lighting's not fantastic here. Now here I have a cup of water directly from the sink here. It is no filtering. It's just rainwater off the roof going through the leaf guard and the sock that I just showed you. And you can see it is reading 1. And then after it goes through the zero water filter, it reads 0. Again, just to, there it is, reading 1 again. Reading 16. Keep in mind they do add minerals back to that, right? So I'm not saying that's not as clean. I'm just saying, there's a difference, right? And then again, 0, and up to 2 this time. Anyways, that kind of shows you just the total dissolved solids and how well that filter works. The second filter that I mentioned isn't actually a filter, it's a treatment. It's a UV light that you stick down in the pitcher, and nuke any viruses or bacteria that might be living in there still. Viruses are notoriously small and can pretty easily slip through any of the physical filters. So, to be on the safe side, a UV treatment is a good idea. But overall, this is what I do. Depending on where you live, your mileage may be very, very different. Also, I'm Gen X, and, we used to drink out of the garden hoses and drinking fountains, etc. So we're kind of used to, whatever's in the water. So again, the point of this is to compare the water that I'm getting out of the tank to the EPA standards. You can see 0, 1, or 2 parts per million is really kind of fantastic compared to the 500 parts per million standard and 1,000 parts per million being considered unhealthy, right? But the larger point that I want to make is a design decision, right? So what I'm doing is attempting to keep the tank clean. So I'm only letting relatively clean water go into the tank and then sit there, right? And then, I'm pulling that water out and further filtering it for drinking. I think a lot of people go the other way and they just dump water into their tank, right? And then as they pull the water out of their tank, then they're subjecting it to whatever filtration processes, they deem appropriate. Either way is valid. There's pros and cons to both those choices. I think it really depends on, how well you maintain your tank, whether it's subjected to sunlight and heat for algae growth, whether animals can get in it, these kinds of things, right? But that's definitely something you want to think about. Okay, that about wraps up the filter section. Now let's look at the plumbing. Okay, apologies if this diagram is a little bit difficult to read. Maybe if you're on a phone on a small screen, it might be kind of hard to see. But this is the architectural conceptual level diagram of my water system and the wood boiler system as well, right? So you can see the wood boiler on the far left, and the dark wide red lines are the boiler circuit. And that's not what we're talking about in this video, so you can kind of just ignore those components for now while we focus on the standard plumbing components. And I believe this is substantially similar to a house that might be on a well system, except instead of a well, I have a tank, right? So instead of pulling water out of the ground, a cistern, which is the large black 1,100-gallon tank in the lower right-hand corner. And you can see coming out of that, I've got some PVC pipes with valves on the bottom, and then I've got two pumps there. The first pump is a low voltage circulation pump, and all it really does is pull water out of the bottom of the tank, push it up through one of the heat exchangers from the wood boiler, and then dump it back in the top of the tank. So in the winter, what that does is it puts 4 or 5 gallons a minute worth of flow back into the tank, and adds about 30 degrees to the temperature of the water. So if the water is 40 degrees in the tank, it's dumping 70-degree water, 4 or 5 gallons of 70-degree water into the tank per minute, which does a pretty good job of keeping it from freezing. Not just the heat, but also the flow, the movement. So while the circulation pump is designed to run nonstop, 24/7, the pump to the left of it is a pressure pump with a much lower duty cycle. So it usually runs about 15 minutes at a time, and it has a pressure switch on it that detects when the system gets below, say, 25 psi, and then it'll run until it's got the tank pumped up to about 55 psi. And that way, it's not running nonstop, right, exceeding its duty cycle. So when you turn on the faucet or the shower and water starts coming out, the pressure from that is really coming from the pressure tank, which has a rubberized bladder in it, and pressurized air. and you could dispense several gallons from the shower or sink faucet, and it's not until the pressure gets below, say, again, 25 psi, which could be 15 or 20 gallons, that the pump is going to kick back on. From the pressure tank, the plumbing it's PVC, but it's pretty standard for indoor plumbing, right? It just runs from there to the sinks and showers, and then from the sinks and showers, you've got normal drains that are PVC based, right? So the whole system there is actually pretty simple. I do have a number of valves, so I can, basically turn off the water at the tank. I can also turn the second valve there and drain the tank. So if I just want the tank to drain, I can open both valves and empty it in maybe 20 minutes or so. So the other thing I'll say about the plumbing is that I completely redid it this year. So I had, the same design basically, but I was using things like shark bite connectors instead of, actual crimps, and having a number of little problems. In the previous years, I hadn't properly insulated everything, and so components were freezing. It was just kind of not a great situation, right? So this year I spent quite a bit of time and money to completely insulate everything. I built boxes around all the outdoor components, and I also, ran the boiler circuit, which is pushing water inside there between 160 to 180 degrees. So I ran the boiler circuit lines in the same essential conduit as the other lines, which would keep them from freezing. I put all that stuff together to really make a more robust system. And the last component that I plan to do later this summer is, in addition to a number of valves that I've put all over the system so that I can, shut off and isolate various components if I want to work on something without water spraying everywhere, is to add some Schrader valves, so I can connect my compressed air systems to this, to essentially blow out all the water out of the system in the event that, say, I wanted to leave the cabin and travel for a month or something like that, and I don't want to have to keep the wood boiler running, to keep the plumbing from freezing. If I want to drain everything, I can just connect my air hoses to the PVC plumbing through the Schrader valves and blow them out. Okay, we spent a lot of time looking at the diagram, so I'll show you the physical plumbing here quickly. Again, a lot of it is boxed off with insulation, so you can't actually see the valves at the moment. You can see the overflow valve in the tank. So up here in the box, for starters, we've got another DC fuse panel because all the pumps are 12 volt DC. You can see the propane instant water heater. That's what it looks like on the outside. It's pretty easy to open up. You can see inside there. Again, the pressure pump is here. In the winter, I use the wood boiler, these 3 heat exchangers. Each one of the 3 adds about 30 degrees to the water. So if my water is, say, 40 degrees, In the winter, in the tank, you know, as it flows through these three, it's going to add about 90 degrees to that 40-degree water, you know, and I'll use the diverter valves on the faucets and shower to regulate that back down to something less than scalding. But to switch between summer and winter, I've got a valve here and then a couple of valves here to isolate the propane heater in the winter. Otherwise, just a tube and the pressure tank, and a little valve gauge that shows me what the pressure is. So, you know, not super complicated. That's pretty much the water system. Well, that's about all I have to say. Y'all come back now.